Hello and welcome back to The Perch from the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle. I'm Noah Zahn, the local government reporter here. This week we're bringing you a story from our reporter Ivy Secrest on how the Laramie County Sheriff's Office is working to update the way that they enforce immigration law here. So Ivy will bring that to you, and be sure to stick around. Our state government reporter Hannah Shields brings us some updates on property tax stories that she's been working on, and I'll be chatting about some new gaming facilities coming to Cheyenne later. But before we get to that, I'm joined here by Ivy. We're recording on Tuesday evening. You actually just finished your story on this, and it'll be out online now, but in Thursday's print edition. Can you tell me a bit about that? I know you met with Sheriff Brian Kozak this morning. Can you tell me a bit about that conversation you had with him?
Yeah, so this morning I went down to the Laramie County Jail to chat with Brian Kozak, our sheriff, about immigration law and law enforcement specifically. So historically, local law enforcement doesn't have a huge role in enforcing immigration. The only entity that can really enforce immigration is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. And what we really talked about was the big changes that are going to be coming through the jail. So the first thing is that the Laramie County Sheriff's Office is pursuing an intergovernmental agreement between the U.S. Marshal Service and the Sheriff's Department. And essentially what that will enable them to do, should it be approved by county commissioners, is that federal law enforcement will be able to essentially rent out a space in the jail for federal inmates. So if they make an arrest in town on federal charges, they'll be able to hold that person here in the Laramie County Jail. They'll be able to go through district court proceedings here and then be transferred, as opposed to being transferred prior to go through proceedings, which is currently the situation that we have. What this means for immigration is that ICE is going to be able to hold people here on federal charges, and they'll go through their court proceedings here, as opposed to being transferred to another facility and then transferred down to Denver to go through immigration court and then transferred to, either back home or to jail or to being deported or whatever comes out of immigration court. And the real point of the IGA, or the Intergovernmental Agreement, is to simplify this process that we have in the jail right now. Kozak described it as incredibly inefficient in the status quo, and really just wanting, with this IGA, to make things quicker for all these different governmental law enforcement agencies that are working together to, address criminals. Then, in addition to this intergovernmental agreement, the Sheriff's Department is also looking at going through something called 287G training.
Well, you can stop me if you're going to get to this later, but before we recorded, you were telling me that this is kind of a new concept for the country, I guess, or how common is this type of program across the country, and why is it just now popping up in Laramie County?
So it's not necessarily new across the country, but It's coming back. So, and it is new for Wyoming. There's, I think, one other jail in the state that has gone through this program, and the 287G program basically is a part of the Illegal Immigration Reformation and Immigrant Responsibility Act. It essentially authorizes ICE to delegate to state and law enforcement officers the authority to perform specified immigration officer functions. And what that means, if you're not looking at the jargon on the website, what that means is that deputies will be able to enforce immigration law within the jail. So instead of having an ICE agent come in and look at someone who maybe they've been flagged because they're undocumented and they've committed a felony, instead of having ICE come in when someone's flagged as undocumented and going through that longer process, deputies will be able to kind of streamline the process of investigating and interviewing the undocumented inmate upon booking. which allows them to transfer that case to federal court and once again speed up this process of processing undocumented immigrants who have committed crimes.
And did Kozak tell you, Sheriff Kozak, did he tell you at all about what that training looks like for these deputies? Like how long it is, what it entails? Do they do it in Laramie County? Or do they go down to Denver or somewhere for it?
Kozak, they're still hammering out the fine details because this training for them is going to take place in the new Trump administration.
Okay.
They're waiting for Trump's inauguration on January 20th to make sure that they have the processes and the program and the length, the length of the program, whatever they're going to go through, is in place properly. From my understanding and my conversation with Kozak, this was something that was much more common prior to the Obama administration and has really shifted since then. So really it's going to be quite a novel process for these guys that go through it because it's going to have drastically changed from the Biden administration.
And it sounds like Sheriff Kozak, he said this would make things much more efficient. Did he express any concern with how things are handled currently? Are there a lot of these immigrants that in Laramie County are in this situation, or is it more precautionary that he's saying this?
The issue here is the inefficiency and how slow the court process is. And when you're going through transferring an inmate from one facility to another, from one court to another, it really lengthens the process and makes things difficult for both those who are being detained and for the legal system as a whole. So Kozak's goal really was, he kept reiterating, the goal is to arrest criminals and get criminals off the street. And that was the verbiage that he used. And he kind of further illustrated that by saying, like, as far as the Laramie County Sheriff's Office goes, they're not interested in going out into the community and looking for undocumented immigrants. They're specifically interested in increasing the efficiency within the jail. So after people are arrested, after their immigration status has been checked at booking, after, they've gone through all of these other processes that already exist, they're not interested in going to communities and looking for undocumented immigrants and arresting them for being undocumented and then deporting them. They're only interested in the criminal aspect.
Yeah, and so another thing I'm curious about this, I know that in some of my reporting that I've done, there's been an issue of capacity at the Laramie County Jail, and a lot of that has to do with just there not being enough mental health services for other people, and they end up the jail being the only option to service that. And so with this program, does the sheriff see this as, if it's more efficient, then it'll open up more space there, but at the same time, they're also leasing out space to the federal government or to ICE? I'm not sure how that works, but
yeah.
Well, did you guys talk about capacity at all and how this will impact that?
Yeah, and that's something that I've come across too in my reporting, is that the capacity at the jail is quite limited, and he actually wasn't concerned about capacity at all. I asked him, he said that they have a relatively low population at the jail and that he's not too concerned about increasing capacity. And once again, like, this program isn't increasing the number of officers on the street or the number of arrests or the only thing it would increase is the number of spaces that are allocated for federal offenders, and at the current, in the status quo, that's 0. So they have not gone through the full process of applying to county commissioners for approval, so I don't actually know how many cells will be set aside for this, if a specific number of cells are set aside, or if it's just like on a need basis. I do know that they are renting out a space, so there will be some income from this, and perhaps they'll address capacity with that income. Perhaps they'll address paying for training. That completely depends on whether or not this program is even approved. The training is separate from the intergovernmental agency agreement. And that is going to happen, it sounds like, no matter what. And once again, that also isn't going to impact capacity or impact the number of undocumented immigrants that they see going through the jail. It's simply going to streamline the process of dealing with those immigrants. What could change how undocumented immigrants are processed within the jail would be the Trump administration and their policies. And that was something we talked about too, which is, under the Biden administration and in the status quo, ICE really only deports people under certain parameters. And COSAC, though this has yet to be seen and we do not know what Trump is going to do, COSAC did suspect that immigration policy is likely going to get much harsher under the Trump administration. We can expect to see it, at the very least, we should expect it to mimic what it was last time.
Mm-hmm. And so in Laramie County specifically, how do you have any sort of pulse on how you think the upcoming administration would impact immigration enforcement here?
Yeah, so while we don't know exactly what the Trump administration is going to do, what we do know is that immigration advocates and politicians, local politicians, have been very adamant about discussing immigration and undocumented immigrants in Wyoming specifically. And when we look at our politicians, like Harriet Hageman or Cynthia Lummis or John Barrasso, a lot of Wyoming politicians have ran their campaigns on this idea that every state is a border state, very much supporting Trump and his increased deportation plans. Very much supporting Sheriff Kozak and his efforts to streamline this process and to, invest in training for local officers who are about to be more involved in immigration than they previously have been. But when we look at immigration advocates like Antonio Serrano at the ACLU, there's this big concern of what the impact of deportation is on the community. And obviously issues of families being torn apart or local businesses losing workers. Serrano talked about being a laborer in Wyoming, working labor jobs prior to getting his job at the ACLU and working alongside immigrants, meeting farmers and ranchers who do have undocumented immigrants working on their ranches, who have good relationships with those immigrants and really respect them. But from Serrano's perspective, truly do not believe that these policies are going to impact the good people that they like and they see every day, but instead only impacting this sort of very scary image of an undocumented immigrant that has been pushed by the Trump campaign and by other politicians. In talking with Serrano, someone who's advocating for immigration rights, who is teaching people what their rights are at workshops and working with the undocumented immigrant and documented immigrant community in Wyoming, and then talking with Kozak about enforcing these rules. I do think an important thing to take away from it is something that Kozak said at the end of our conversation, which is they're not interested in going out into the community and arresting people for being undocumented. They still want people to feel comfortable calling the sheriff's department if they've experienced a crime, even if they're an undocumented person or if they've witnessed a crime. Their goal is to lower crime in the state. And a lot of our politicians in the state center their rhetoric around undocumented immigrants accompanying them alongside crime. And I think Serrano brings up a very interesting point of this is a community that is much bigger than undocumented immigrants who are also criminals. And it's important to remember that that is who Kozak is addressing.
Well, I appreciate you going through your article and breaking that down for us. And I know that it's late here and I don't want to keep you much longer, but is there anything else that you want to touch on this topic?
I think that covers it.
Great. Thank you, Ivy. I appreciate it. Now I'm here with Hannah Shields, our state government reporter. You've been busy getting ready for the legislative session starting next week now. So can you tell us a bit about what you've been working on leading up to that?
Yeah, so we'll definitely go more into depth next week. Today the Wyoming Freedom Caucus and Governor Gordon kind of outlined their plans for the legislative session. But for right now, I just kind of wanted to do an update. Last week, Secretary of State Chuck Gray officially certified a citizen-led initiative to slash property taxes for qualified Wyoming homeowners by 50%, meaning that this property tax initiative will go before Wyoming voters in 2026 and will appear on the general election ballot. As always, for the last couple of years, property taxes has definitely been like a huge hot topic issue in the legislature. And so when I spoke with Revenue Department Director Brenda Henson about it, what she basically told me is this is something that lawmakers might want to consider as they consider other property tax relief programs and what that would mean in terms of creating more backfills from the state to replace the lost revenue from property tax relief programs.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Hannah, and I'm sure you'll continue to follow that one.
Yeah, no, for sure, Noah. But in terms of news, what are some of the things that you've been covering on your end?
Yes, so as the local government reporter, this past week hasn't been super busy, with the holidays, and I'm sure both of us have experienced that, not a whole lot of meetings to cover going on, but I actually just got back a couple of hours ago from a Laramie County Board of County Commissioners meeting that was pretty interesting. The main thing there were two new commissioners, Don Hollingshead and Ty Zwanitzer, that had their first meeting, but the commissioners there approved 3 new gaming facilities to come to Cheyenne, which is another topic that will be a hot button issue at the legislative session.
Absolutely.
But these 3 facilities were proposed by Cowboy Racing, who owns Thunder Plains just about 10 miles east of Cheyenne off of the Hillsdale exit on I-80. And that's Wyoming's first full-size racing track. And they're hoping to get these gaming machines. It's simulcasting and historic horse racing at off-track betting facilities. And they hope the revenue from that will ultimately fund further developments at the Thunder Plains Park. They want a hotel and an entertainment center and a sporting complex and all this stuff. But right now, whenever they start operating their first live horse races this year, it'll be a pretty bare-bones version of it, just with some temporary attendee stands and some amenities there. So that was an interesting thing. That'll be in, I guess we won't have a paper out today on Wednesday because the Postal Service is closed, but it'll be online now and in our Thursday edition, I believe. And other than that, over the weekend I did a roundup of some new businesses. We've got a new ramen house coming to downtown Cheyenne, a second Breaks Plus location, and a cannabis-themed sub shop called Chiba Hut.
Chiba Hut.
I've never been to one, but they're
you're missing out.
Headquartered in Fort Collins, but they're opening up at the new at the former doghouse location, and that closed unexpectedly amid a federal investigation a couple of months ago. But that's kind of what I've been working on this week. So that's all I've got. You have anything else, Hannah?
You'll definitely learn more next week about my priorities. One of them will be including gaming bills that will be discussed by the legislature. Outside of that, it's going to be a lot of hot topic social issues, such as restricting transgender access to female-only spaces and sports teams, property taxes, and a lot of more fun stuff for us to talk about next week.
Great. Yeah, so be sure to tune back in next Wednesday. We'll dive into some more of those as the legislative session kicks off next Tuesday, I believe. But until then, thanks for tuning in, and be sure to check back in next week.